you. Well, hello again. My name is Sue Hutchins, and welcome to Iowa Prison Perspectives. For those of you who have not joined before, let me tell you a little bit about what we're doing here and the reason that we're doing it. This particular video channel is dedicated to the public to be able to have some correct information and understanding about what goes on in prison from the perspectives of people who are involved in the system. The interviews on this particular channel are either from people who have been incarcerated, people who have worked in the system, people who have loved ones who have been incarcerated, or people like myself who are advocates and are trying to make some reform and give information to the public and let people know what the system really is and what the system really needs. This channel is a collaboration. My efforts are a collaboration between the Iowa Justice Action Network, Living Beyond the Bars of Iowa, and Iowa Cure. I would love to hear from you about your opinion after you've watched this video and others, how you feel about this. If you think what we're doing makes sense, if you agree with what I'm saying, if you agree with what the people who are being interviewed are saying, if you disagree, if you have really strong feelings or even just mild feelings, if you have found this interesting or helpful, and also, if you were a person who feels like you ought to be interviewed, either a person who has worked in the system, a person who has been incarcerated, or you have a loved one or have had a loved one who has been incarcerated in your life, you can please contact me at iowaprisonperspectives@gmail.com. And that's iaprisonperspectives@gmail.com. I did a video earlier this month about opening things up to talk to people who have been incarcerated in other states, because I have gotten quite a bit of email and other asking from people to please, what do they do in other states? What do they do around us? I know that people are beginning to know what we do in Iowa, but what do we do in other states? What happens in other states, and particularly border states? And every time that I talk to a legislator about reform, they always want to know, well, what's happening in Nebraska? What's happening in Michigan? What's happening in Wisconsin? And so I decided to open this up to include our bordering states also and get people who have worked or have loved ones or have been incarcerated in other states. And today we're fortunate to have someone who was a juvenile lifer.
No, I was not a juvenile lifer.
Oh, someone who was a lifer
Yeah.
in another state. And he is going to talk to you about his story, about what prison was like for him, about the process of how he got out, and about basically what he feels like what worked and what he feels like needs to change. He will also be talking about his reentry process, what he thought it was going to be like and what it actually was like. I didn't realize until just now that he was not a juvenile lifer, which really brings me to this. He is in a unique position because in Iowa, lifers who are not juvenile lifers have no chance at this point of getting out of prison. So his story is very different than any of the stories of people who are lifers incarcerated in Iowa. Our commutation process is very broken, and we have not had any adult lifers released for over 35, well, now 37, 38 years in Iowa. And so in Iowa, life really is death by incarceration. I mean, that's really true. Life means life. So I will introduce you to Richard and let him tell his story. He'll be talking, first of all, about however much he wants to give you about his crime and his length of time and what he did in prison and what he got out of prison, what he made himself available to in order to be able to get out of prison. So with that, I will say welcome, Richard, and thank you very much for being here. It's all yours.
Thank you for having me. First of all, my name is Richard Watkins. I was sentenced in July of 97 to a term of life with parole. My childhood was shady, I guess at best. I was in and out of trouble as a juvenile, boys training school, youth homes, things like that. Never really could get it. Um, I abused drugs, alcohol, the whole gambit. And one particular night, things got out of hand, and I got in a fight that ended really badly. Uh, the guy that I killed, his name was Joseph Mitchell, and we fought, and just I there's really nothing else I can say about that particular thing. Is that I elevated something to an extent that it didn't need to go to, and it was because of the bad decisions I made throughout my entire life. I was one bad decision after another, after another, after another. So I went through the court process. I was sentenced to a term of life with the possibility of parole. But as you said about Iowa, Michigan, for many, many, many years, they even had the head of the parole board some years ago say what you had just said, that life means life. And their statement was, unless a lifer does something extraordinary, he shouldn't get out. And that held true for a very long time. I was young. I was 26 when I went, and this was actually my second time in prison.
Mm-hmm.
And for the first 5 years, I was a knucklehead, just plain and simple. Can't really put it any other way. You know, I I extorted people. Got into some stuff with some of the COs. So it was a challenging time. I ended up in maximum security joints, behind every wall that Michigan has. But I think the turning point for me was I was in Marquette, and my mom had come to see me. And when I had to look at her behind that glass, it crushed me. And that was the moment that I decided to turn things around. And if I was never going to come home, I at least wanted to be able to touch my mom on my visits.
Yeah.
So that was a big a big moment for me and my direction, because excuse me, I've seen a lot of guys in the 25 and a half years that I was in prison. I saw a lot of guys go down the wrong road,
Mm-hmm.
and they didn't even realize that they were going down that road until it was too late. You
Mm-hmm.
know, when I finally received my parole, it was only after, I spent many, many years, not even with the programming that was available, but I spent many years within myself trying to get a handle on my anger, because my anger was the biggest factor that kind of led to everything. I'd get mad and I'd just react.
Mm-hmm.
And I wrote a book. It's called If You Don't Like It. And one of the things I talk about in there in the very beginning is in the opening is a guy asked me one time why I wrote, because I did a lot of writing in there. I created some games, wrote some books, but I always told people it was my therapy, because it helped me
Mm-hmm.
calm my mind. And I realized early on that nothing we had belonged to us but our minds. That was the only thing that the MDOC couldn't lay stake to, was my
Yes.
sanity.
Mm-hmm.
So I made it a point to stay mentally strong, and just keep going forward no matter what. And
And that was a conscious decision on your
yes,
part.
yes, yeah, I actually made that decision because I watched over
Yes.
the years, I watched my mom get old. I watched
Mm-hmm.
my sister grow up in pictures and visiting rooms.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And
So
somehow that really finally broke through to you.
yeah, because when I had my public hearing, the lady who facilitated the hearing, she asked me two questions. She asked me when was the moment I decided to change, and what was the reason I decided to change. And I told her the situation with my mother, that
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't see hurting my mother any more than I had already had throughout my life.
Mm-hmm.
And whether or not I ever went home, I wanted to be somebody my family could could be proud of in the things I could accomplish, because I was never really the the best part of the family. I always rebelled. I always did what I thought was best for me, and a lot of times it just didn't work out. So I was one that deserved to go. I will say that now. I was out of control, and I deserved prison. I didn't really agree that I deserved life, because I
Mm-hmm.
always felt that I should have been convicted of manslaughter. But at the end of the day, it was me that took the life, and I had to pay for that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I came to terms with that immediately. So that was never really an issue with me, stressing over that. My stress came from watching family, and every visit got harder to watch them leave.
Mm-hmm.
It never got easier. And towards the end, right around the time COVID hit, I started having back problems. So I kind of focused on, some of the anger classes they had in there. And I got a couple books of my own, and I read them, and I, wrote out a kind of like a book report, so to speak, for the parole board. I sent it to the parole board. I We didn't have, as lifers in Michigan, we didn't have access to the sanctioned programs that they have for other people. They just didn't give them to us. So we had to make the choice to actively search these things out.
Yes.
And that's what I did. I until they actually called me for my parole hearing, I didn't even think that I had a chance at going home, because they simply just didn't let lifers out for a long, long time unless they were
Mm-hmm.
old, decrepit, and they were so old they couldn't get in trouble no more. I think that was kind
Mm-hmm.
of their theory.
Mm-hmm.
But by the grace of God alone, they took interest in me, and they felt that I had, you know, matured enough. I don't really like to use the word rehabilitation, because so many people look at rehabilitation in so many different ways, but it became maturity for me. I matured, and I started to see things for what they really were. And when I started to interact with the man that I seen in the mirror, he's the one I had to defeat first.
Mm-hmm.
I had to I had to convince him that the direction I was going was where we needed to go. And I think that is one of the biggest problems for guys inside, is that they can't beat their own head. They stay inside their head and can't find a way out.
Mm-hmm.
And so I tried to always be an example. I stayed out of trouble. I stayed away from drugs. I stayed away from alcohol. I never had a substance abuse. I never had a fight. And one of the questions that I was asked at my public hearing was, when I was out, I had an anger issue. I fought all the time. And the guy asked me, he says, what changed when you came inside? He said, because I was looking to see a lot of fights in your early years. And,
Mm-hmm.
I explained to him that once I eliminated the alcohol and drugs from my
Mm-hmm.
routine, my anger didn't boil over as much. I still got mad. Believe me, I still got mad,
Mm-hmm.
but my anger didn't boil over as much. So it kind of gave me the incentive to push a little more, just a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more. And then finally, when I look back, I had changed several things about myself. And ultimately, a majority of the parole board, they agreed. The rare program, there was a friend of mine, his name was Greg Wines. He created a program called rare
And he
responsibility.
was incarcerated. He was
Yeah,
incarcerated also.
he
Yes.
was actually a juvenile lifer.
Okay. And he is now
And
out. Am
yeah,
I
he
right
is
about
now out, and he is actually off parole now. and he is
Yes.
doing good, and he is advocating for juvenile lifers, and
Mhm.
he is probably one of the biggest reasons I'm home now, because in that rare program, one of the things that they have you do as a final lesson is to write an amends letter to the victim's family and the victim.
Mhm.
They never get that letter, but the coordinators, they read it, they take things out of the letter, and they send like a summary of the letter to the parole board on your behalf. And with that, I think from that I learned how to exercise empathy. That was something I never
Mhm.
really understood, because I didn't have a lot of instances in my life that weren't self-created.
Mhm.
A lot of bad ones. Most of the bad things that happened to me in my life were because of the bad decisions I made, just plain and simple.
Mhm.
So that really showed me how to put myself in the place of others, and to do my best to how I would feel if I was in that position.
Mhm.
And I think one of the things that I still use from that class is always taking a look at myself and what I'm about to do, and I ask myself, how will this affect the people around me?
Mhm.
Because one thing that really hit me was the ripple effect. And we don't really realize what type of effect we have on everybody around us. And with my case, it wasn't as bad as many, but it was bad. There was a knife involved, and I after I took that class, I realized not only did I destroy his family and my own family, but the first responders had to see that, and who knows how they dealt with that emotionally. And so
Mhm.
it's just the neighborhood that people were scared. These are
Mhm.
the things that we don't understand, because the first thing we always say when somebody says, well, what was the consequences of your action, we say, well, I'm locked up.
Right.
But
It's all
if
about me, me, me.
exactly, and if you break that down, you will see that you as the individual are probably the least affected by what you do, because you know our our fate at that point is final, and we have nothing more to worry about. It's probably not a good use of the word, but that's how I looked at it. Like, my
We
worries were over
Yeah,
at that.
you don't have to deal with the aftermath
Right.
and the emotional aftermath of
Yes.
what the act has caused.
Yeah, my
The
my
loss of a
mother.
loved one in your case.
Yeah, my mother actually told me many years later that she had to go to counseling after this all
Mhm.
happened. And that crushed me. That I was the reason my mom had to go talk to somebody, because she couldn't figure things out in her head by herself. And because my mom and I have always been close, so that crushed me. So it was it was many things that I saw within myself that I knew I had to change, and I had the opportunity to do it. I was in a place that I wasn't going nowhere, and I had all the time in the world to fix myself.
Mhm.
So I made that choice. I think
Yes. Well,
initially I did it for my family, so
mhm.
they didn't have to suffer no more. But ultimately, I was the one that had to look in the mirror, and if I didn't like who I saw in the mirror, then I was in trouble, and I had to like him again.
That's who you live with.
And,
That's who
and
you go to bed with,
exactly,
that's who you get up with. Well,
because
you bring up a really good point about your mom and going to counseling, and good for her that she went to get
yeah,
some help. Good for her. My opinion is the most overlooked population in our society are the family members of people who are incarcerated. We do nothing culturally, socially, economically to be of assistance and help for those people. We
yeah, I
do
agree.
nothing. And except in a lot of cases, blame them,
Right.
especially the moms. What kind of a mother did you have that you got in this situation? Those kinds of questions. And then the loved ones of the person who is incarcerated. The only thing they're guilty of is loving someone who's
Right.
incarcerated. but they are treated shamefully out here
Yeah,
in a lot of ways.
and that's something that guys don't realize when
Right.
family comes to see us. You know, I've been at a few facilities where I could actually watch my family come through the gate,
Mm-hmm.
and every time I just my stomach turned in knots because I had to watch these people frisk my mom, frisk my sister, frisk
Mm-hmm.
my brothers, my aunt, you know, and it's like, wow, all this is because of me that they have to endure this. And usually there's a point that I've realized with dealing with people in prison. There's a point when a guy either decides to embrace where he's at and become part of it, or embrace where he's at and remain apart from it.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
that's one of the things that I believe that I talk about in my book is, there's two kinds of people. There's the kind of person that becomes part of their environment to survive it, and then there's people that live within that environment to overcome it.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if a lot of people would understand that, but the difference is when you merely try to survive it, you fall victim to all the negativity, to all the drug abuse, the alcoholism, to all that is alive in prison. One of the things I tell the younger kids in the family is everything you hear about prison is true. you know it, it, the hard cold facts about it is people get raped, people get robbed, people get killed. That
Mm-hmm.
happens. It happens in every prison in every state, and we're left to deal with it ourselves. So for me, it was more important, I think, for me that I become somebody that I don't create that kind of hurt and pain anymore for anybody.
Mm-hmm.
And writing was kind of my outlet. You
Yeah.
know, I learned early on that I could write pretty good. So I just started creating and writing, and now I have a lot of stuff that is sitting in storage that many times since I've been home, I've wanted to burn in a fire because I felt it was all wasted. You know,
I hope you won't do that.
no, I won't. I
I
have I
hope
have
I hope
family
you
members.
overcome those urges because it's not wasted at all.
Yeah, I have family members that assure me that if I even try that, I'm not going to like the result. So yeah,
Well,
but
and it served a wonderful purpose. Whatever purpose it serves in the future is gravy because it already served a wonderful purpose of helping you make the changes internally that you
right,
need to make for yourself. But
and
nobody can do that for you. I mean, that's a
no,
decision that each individual has to make in here, out here, or in there.
and it's
Everybody is
not easy.
faced with what kind of a person am I going to be?
Yeah, it's not easy. Don't
No,
you know?
it's not.
And you had mentioned something earlier about you also want to discuss how we as individuals that have been incarcerated, how we integrate ourselves back into society, how well we uh,
Hmm.
function once we're out, what is the bad, what is the good. And I
And
think
what is your illusion of what it's going to be like? And your
my
be
illusion was I was going to get out, I was going to have all my books published, I was going to get a lot of money, and I was going to live high on the horse.
Mhm.
That was definitely an illusion. No, I came home and I realized I had to get a real job to pay real bills.
Mhm.
Um, I ended up over the course of the 2 years I've been out, I've had a lot of struggles. I had to have another back surgery. Uh, I was with a woman that it was a very toxic situation, so I left, and she made it her mission to try to have me sent back to prison. And there was a lot said that she tried to use against me, but when I felt everything going sideways, told me to come see her and bring her a couple of things, and I had a couple of things that I wanted to pick up. I decided to record the interaction,
Mm-hmm.
and I recorded 3 hours worth of her basically holding me hostage, using my parole as a weapon against me. She actually, basically told me, "You're going to come back to me and leave your girl, or I'm going to send you back to prison."
Mm-hmm.
And she did. She tried. She when I told her I was done, I wasn't talking to her no more. I wasn't going to deal with the threats no more. She actually called the police and told them I molested her granddaughter. And she told this story like 5 times. And each time they tried to give her the chance to change her story. And each time she told the same story. And when she heard the recording, then she wanted to take everything back. And
Sure.
it was a little too late then.
Right.
Mm.
Right.
It I put some of the blame on me because I stayed there longer than I should have. And I let her believe that there was more to our relationship than what there was, just
Mm-hmm.
because I didn't want the conflict and I didn't want, you know, the backlash of her sending me back to prison, which is what she tried to do anyways. So I made mistakes in that relationship and I took responsibility for that. When she was sentenced, I said, I made a statement to the judge and I told him, there was things I could have done differently.
Mm-hmm.
You know, everything is always a learning experience. We make mistakes, and true maturity is when you make those mistakes, you realize what you did, why you did it, how you did it, and you figure out how not to do it again.
Mm-hmm.
And it's that
Exactly.
simple. And one of the analogies I like to use, and we called it critical thinking because there was a program in there called Chance for Life that I took.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things we talked about in there was critical thinking on thinking about what your action is going to do to others down the road. And I
Yes.
always use the analogy of spilling water on the floor. Most people, when we spill water on the floor, we just keep on walking. We don't think about the next person that may come and slip on that floor, fall, hurt themselves, be out of work. Now their children don't have, it's just a never ending cycle of ripples when you don't take the time to do everything you can to protect those around you, because we have a responsibility to make sure that what we do is safe for other people. And that's something I never understood because I never
Mm-hmm.
really cared, you
Mm-hmm.
know. And I think that was all part of the drug abuse, the alcoholism. I was trying to hide from myself, and ultimately I couldn't, and I had to face me, and I didn't like who I saw.
And you made the decision to grow up,
I did.
basically, and to mature. And that is an absolutely necessary decision for each individual to be faced with. Programs can help people get to that point, can give some direction, but nobody outside of the individual can make that change for someone else.
Right.
It needs to come from inside you, and the only one who can do the work is the individual. So we need programs like you talked about, the program that Greg wrote that was
Right.
very helpful. You talked about some other things that you took that were helpful. Ultimately, it is up to the individual to come to that facing themselves and that moment of enlightenment, I guess, for lack of a different word, of, oh my goodness, I need to make me into who I want to be.
Right. And
So,
I think too, there's a lot of things that happen, in our lives, in there and out here.
mhm.
I was actually blessed to be able to come home to all my immediate family. I didn't lose any of them while I was inside.
Yes, you really are
So
fortunate.
I was very fortunate for that. And I came home to a very, very strong support system. But I want to make it clear, I came out here and thought I was going to be in control of everything, and I realized I'm not in control of nothing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I encourage
Mm-hmm.
others to hold on to their dreams, but
Yes.
understand that like a phrase in the Bible that says there's a time and season for everything.
Yes.
And we have to be able to see that. And the guys that are coming home, they have to make sure that they prepare themselves mentally for all the
Mm-hmm.
rejection that they're going to receive. I I couldn't get a job. Even felon friendly companies wouldn't hire me because I had a homicide.
Mm-hmm.
I had one company that took a chance on me, and I've been with them now since I've been home. Um, Again, it boils down to the support group you have.
Mm-hmm.
Have a strong support group, you have to create one.
Yes.
You know,
And appreciate them.
right? Because there are people out here that want to help and want us to succeed, but there's also people out here that, you know, like one of the things the lady at the parole hearing said to me, she said, "You killed somebody. Why should I ever let you out?" There's a
Mm-hmm.
lot of people that feel that way.
That's right.
People that take lives should never be out of prison. And that sentiment, that type of thinking, though it's true, a lot of people do feel that way, and it's probably true for most of us. But it's a situation where we have to be looked at as individuals, because each individual in prison, they find what works best for them to make it through.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there are some very dangerous people in prison, and there are some pretty harmless people in prison, and they
Mm-hmm.
put us all together.
Right.
There's gangs that, so it's, as far as reform, and I say the reform thing because that's where it's got to start. The lawmakers all try to do this reform through the legislature, but that never works. I was in prison for 25 and a half years, and I never once seen any of their prison reforms work on the inside.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they have to create programs where the people that have been in prison for long periods of time, that have made the changes, can talk to the young people who are starting down that road, and they can understand it's not a joke, it's not a vacation, it's not a place you want to be. Because at the end of the day, even though you have food, it's not very good. Even though you
Mm-hmm.
have a place to sleep, it's not very comfortable. you know and it's really hard watching your family get old from a visiting room.
Mm-hmm.
you know One of the things that I had told my mom when I got my parole, and the impact, can I focus on that for just a minute?
Yes.
I
Yes.
want to give
Yes.
a visual to people.
Yes.
So I knew I was doing good. I had a parole hearing after I had a hearing at 10 years, which was mandatory in Michigan. They got to see you physically after 10 years. And then after that, it's 5-year reviews, and they don't ever have to see you again. So, as people prepare for that, we have to remember that these are people who make a living from us being locked up. So their first choice is not really to let us out.
Right.
I wrote a paper that was published in the Design Convictions, Inside Design Conviction, the magazine. And that's one of the things I talked about. Is it's basically a branding against their own product when they try to do reforms.
Prison is big business.
Yeah, and when you try to reform it and cut down on the population, they're essentially putting out ads against their own product. The only company ever in the history of this country that's ever had to do that was the tobacco industry.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where I think the reluctance comes in. You know,
Mm-hmm.
on the surface, they want to show that people can change, but deep down, they don't really like it because when they change, they get out, and so where at what point do we intervene to stop people from even going in the first place? What programs do we have for the younger kids, for the ones in juvenile that when you look at them, they're on a path straight to prison? What type of stuff do we have for them to keep them from going there?
Mm-hmm.
Because frankly, I don't care about their bottom line. You know, there are some good people in prison that deserve second chances.
Yes,
And there are some bad people in prison that don't ever deserve to go home.
exactly.
And I was never scared to tell people that.
Yes,
You know, I
that's
wasn't all
absolutely true.
I wasn't always the most popular person, but I took I took a lot of self pride in the fact that I spent 25 and a half years inside and never joined an organization.
Mm-hmm.
I did it on my own, by myself, on my own merits. And, one thing I told my mom, and I kind of was trying to get to this first and I went off track a little bit, was I told her, a parole was bittersweet because I had friends in there that I've had for 25 years that I was
That you
leaving
grew up
behind.
with,
Yeah,
people that that you're closer to than family in a lot of
yes.
ways. Mhm.
And I had to leave them behind. When I
Exactly.
the day I paroled, there must have been 30 guys hooting and hollering for me,
Mm-hmm.
on the other side of the fence.
Mm-hmm.
And it was and the picture I want to paint for everybody is I was a lifer. I never thought I was ever going to go home. That was in my head. I did not think I would ever go home.
Mm-hmm.
I did a second commutation, and my first commutation my aunt did for me, bless her heart, but I think it did me a disservice because the parole board in Michigan, at least, they want to hear from the prisoner, not somebody else.
Right.
They want to know how we changed.
Mm-hmm.
So I resubmitted a commutation. And when it got denied, it was like a month later when they actually called me to see the board. So myself, I actually like to tell people I believe that commutation was successful because with me, the parole board actually had jurisdiction to parole me at some point.
Mm-hmm.
So they didn't need a commutation to let me go.
Yes.
And I believe that is what opened the door for me. And they wanted to hear from me myself. And so I maintained that through the whole process. And I actually, from the moment I had my parole hearing until the day I walked out of prison, it was almost a year. And I like to tell people I woke up one morning serving life and I went to bed that day with 52 days left.
Yeah.
That's
A shock.
yeah,
Wow.
you know, but as you know, we never quite believe it until we have the paperwork in our hand, and then we really don't believe it until we go out the front door.
See,
And then
that's the
we,
thing.
and
I
then
don't
we
think you
really don't
believe it
believe
until
it,
you're sleeping in your own bed and you've
and
been there
then
for a while.
and then we really don't believe it until we're off parole.
That's
So
right.
there's always that.
Right.
At least for me, there's always
It's
that
always
fact in
right
my
over here.
head
It's always
that
right here.
yes, that tells me you are still a ward of the state, you are still on
That's right.
parole, you still have to walk that fine line.
That's right.
But like I tell people, if you ain't doing nothing wrong, you ain't got nothing to hide.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of been my philosophy since I've been home. I've tried to do a lot of things and I've failed, but I'm gonna keep pushing forward because going back is not an option for me.
Yes.
You
And
know,
you
I
have a good support. So you've talked about the necessity of a good support network, the
yes,
necessity of being realistic about what it's like out here, holding on to your dreams, and being realistic about taking responsibility for what you can do and owning up to what you can't do.
right,
And the necessity of making the change from inside yourself, that the change does not come from out there, it comes from in here.
right,
And yes, things out there have great impact on that. But those things are things in essence, that you have sought out and that you have built. The things out there are things that you have brought into your life to make the changes that are necessary for you to be the man that you want to be.
Right. And what I think people need to understand is, mm, you know, we as individuals who have been incarcerated for an exceptional amount of time, there's habits and things that we pick up in there that are not easy to break.
Let go of.
And I'll give you something simple, eating, for example. I went hungry in prison many times. I now eat really fast, and I
Mm-hmm.
try not to eat fast, but it's kind of bred in me that I have to eat fast, because
Mm-hmm.
there were times that when we were in chow halls, that when they were sitting us, if they got back around to your table and you weren't done, you were done.
Right.
You know, and then there's other mannerisms, just certain things that we have to learn to not rely on out here so much as we did in there, but to develop new ways to interact socially.
Sure. Because you don't have socialization in prison. You're
Not
with all men, and women are with all women. And yes, you have, but it's very guarded and hyper vigilant.
Yes,
And
it is.
people out here, I've had guys tell me, people bump into you at Walmart. Walmart seems to be like the phenomenal place that people are just like freakingly overwhelmed. They're just like, oh my gosh, there's a whole row of choices of deodorant. I don't even, all I did is stand there and stare at them. I I can't
For me,
believe this. And
for
people
me,
bumping into each other, and I've talked to guys who still wear their shower shoes in the shower after a couple years out.
it's funny you say that because I'm actually wearing mine right now.
Yeah, I mean, it just becomes habit. One of
Yeah,
the things I really believe is that information is important to share with loved ones before you get, I mean, and talk about, to be able to, a
yeah,
lot of misunderstandings because of unrealistic expectations
and,
happen out here
and
when someone is released.
and I
And
think,
sharing those habits that you have and your family being able to accept those. Like, don't come up behind me and just touch me on the shoulder. Let me sit in a corner in a restaurant where I can see the door. I don't want to go to movies where I sit in the dark with somebody behind me. I don't want to do that. I don't like it when people bump into me at Walmart. I don't like that. I don't like it when cars go zooming by me and I don't know who's in them.
yeah,
I don't really like anybody behind me a whole lot that I can't see.
yeah,
I
that
don't like crowds very much. I get
that's a
car
big
sick
issue.
in the car. I don't know what to do with this friggin' cell phone. I
It's
mean,
just
there are just a lot of things that
yes, and it can become very overwhelming.
exactly,
Well, I
exactly.
was I was prepared mentally, but I think I was prepared mentally in a whole different way. And it's kind of hard to explain that, but I was prepared mentally to come home and stay home.
Hmm.
What I wasn't prepared for was all the setbacks I would receive at every turn. And I say it to my family a lot and I say it to friends. I understand why so many people go back to prison because at some point they say, "Hey, this is too difficult. I was somebody in there. I'm nobody out here. Let me go back to what I know."
Hmm.
And and it becomes a never-ending cycle for them.
Yes.
For me, I owed it to myself, to my family, to my friends, to the system. And I guess people would say that's kind of being a traitor, supporting the system, but you have to thank the system because Michigan for a long time would not let lifers go. And I think COVID had a lot to do with that.
Hmm.
COVID changed everything. and I am so thankful and so blessed that I was one of them that they took a chance on, because I have completed 2 years of a 4-year parole term already. I've done a parole. You know,
which is awesome.
you know,
And
I
congratulations.
I
Congratulations.
I just, moving forward is the only direction I know. I don't my body doesn't really have a reverse. I don't go backwards very often, you know, but that took a lot of work. I thought that I would be a little more emotional doing this, because sometimes I'm just an emotional wreck when I talk about all this stuff, because it's so
Mhm.
profound in my life.
Yes.
You know, the struggles we face out here when we're trying to get back into society and trying to become a member of society and trying to do our part, they are things that none of us that are in prison ever did before. If we did, we wouldn't have been there.
Right.
So we have to learn how to live an entirely different way.
Hmm.
And I think the only way that's possible is that guys and ladies have to understand you cannot, under no circumstances, add alcohol and drugs to the equation.
Hmm.
You cannot, because it's going to destroy it every time. That it's going to make things worse every time. I For me, I made a choice a long, long time ago that I would never touch another drop of alcohol or do another hard drug. I don't feel that I have that right anymore. I feel that was a right that I lost when I killed somebody.
Hmm.
You know, because if that's what I do when I'm drinking, I can never trust myself to drink again.
Right. Right. The effect that it has on your brain is not something you can afford.
When I had my hearing, I was ready to face his family.
Hmm.
So if by chance they do see this,
Hmm.
I'm really, really sorry
Yes.
for what I did.
Yes.
And I vow, I vowed a long time ago that I would do everything in my power to help whoever I can to not go down that road I went down, because I went down a really, really dark road for a very, very long time. And I almost didn't come out of it. If there's burnt bridges, fix them. If there's if there's uncertainty, figure it out. If there's hesitation, press forward. If there's misunderstandings, talk it out.
Hmm.
If if
Hmm.
there's fear, face it. You know, that's the only way that we stay out. It's the only way that we as individuals who have been there and done a lot of time, that are conditioned to certain things, that's the only way that we become what the parole board thinks we can, by letting us come home,
Hmm.
because they're the first ones to take a chance on us.
Right. Right.
I My life hasn't been all peaches and cream since I've been home. I cry a lot. I,
Hmm.
I work hard, but at the end of the day, I'm making an honest living,
Yes.
and I am doing my best to be an example for others around me, so that they don't have to go down the road that I went down, because it's not a good road. It's a dark road. And if I wouldn't have taken the time to change my course, I wouldn't be here talking to you now.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
I just, my I think we talked about it on the phone, and I said it I think earlier. My advice to everybody that's coming home is hold on to your dreams, but prepare yourself for rejection at every turn. Expect
Mm-hmm.
rejection when you walk in the door. That way nothing surprises you.
Yes.
Don't be discouraged because you're going to get rejected, but be prepared for the rejection because with each rejection, it gets a little bit easier to move forward. You know, it's like, I guess the best way to put it is it's like a storm. In the heart of the storm, it rains really, really hard, but when you keep pressing forward, that rain slowly lessens and you
Mm-hmm.
eventually move out of that storm only to face another one down the road. But each time you get through that storm, you become strong enough to get through the next storm that's even bigger.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'm not perfect. I've never been perfect. I'm still not perfect, even though I like to think I am. But I have a family that has accepted my apologies and has moved forward with me. I had an
Mm-hmm.
uncle when I went to prison. I had an uncle. He disowned me, and through my mom and my aunt and the stuff I would write and stuff, he he showed up at my public hearing, and his his testimony was very impactful. I think for the parole board because I did burn a lot of bridges before I went to prison, but
Mm-hmm.
I tried to repair the ones I could when I was in there,
Mm-hmm.
so that when I came out, I didn't have to focus on that. You know, I've had a second back surgery since I've been home. Physically, I don't know how much more my body can take, because I grew old in prison. I'll be
Mm-hmm.
54 in November. It is what it is. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I'm learning that out here, you have to take whatever life gives you and you have to deal with it and move forward because if you don't, you're going to be stuck in a whirlwind and all you're going to do is go in circles. And by the time you get out of it, you're not going to know where you're at. It's like a tornado is a good analogy because it picks you up, spins you crazily, and drops you where you don't know where you're at, and you're so shaken from the storm you can't go nowhere but sit there and you know worry about what's going on. And my advice is just keep pushing forward
Mm-hmm.
because I think the atmosphere is changing a little bit about felons. I know Michigan had a stipulation when I came home that we couldn't have contact with any felons at all.
Mm-hmm.
And they just changed that stipulation, says that we can't have contact with anybody in the MDOC. So they're realizing, I think, that some of these felons that they're saying we can't have contact with are some of the friends we grew up with in prison that are part
Right.
of our support system.
Right.
So I think that will help to move guys forward because my PO told me, he is never going to deny me socializing or interacting with someone that is good for me to interact with.
Yes. And that's the key. That is the key.
So I just, I can't go back. I won't go back. You know, I'm not hungry no more. I'm not cold no more.
Mm-hmm.
I have other problems now, but those aren't two of them.
Right.
I vowed when I came home I would never be hungry. I would never go hungry again. I would never be cold again
Mm-hmm.
because I was hungry and cold a lot.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and something as simple as a hair dryer I had to have. I would use a hair dryer in our room to warm our room up just to stay warm at night.
Yes.
You know, things people don't think about, and I guess for those that have never been incarcerated that are listening, you know, they have to understand that when we're inside, the lines are clear. They're black and white. There's no gray.
Exactly. Yes.
And there's no gray. And that's the way we think. It's either
Mm-hmm.
good for us or it's bad for us. There's no in
Mm-hmm.
between.
Right.
And I think that is the hardest thing for people out here to understand about us is we view things much differently because we've lived in a much different environment for so long.
Exactly.
Luckily, luckily for wasn't too overwhelmed by everything out here. I did have a panic attack my first morning out. We went to a restaurant to eat, and halfway through the meal, I had to get up and go to the bathroom. But I had a friend there with me who had actually done time. I had met him actually in prison, and he came in the bathroom and he just grabbed me and held me, and I worked it out, and we went back out. And we ate. We had a really good day, and I got to see everybody, and it was one of the greatest days of my life.
Mm-hmm.
And the
And
next
that's
week,
important for people. That's important for people to know. And that's also important, if I can interrupt you, because we're
yeah,
getting close
absolutely,
to where we need that.
yep,
Um, that it's people who have been incarcerated or who are incarcerated that can be the most helpful to people who are coming out here.
yeah,
And we need to utilize people who have been there. It's like in prison, it seems to me, my experience, the lifers are the ones who are the most help to the youngsters that have come in. More help than the programming, more help than certainly than the psychologists who've never been in prison and have wonderful book learning but don't have any life experience. There's
right,
nothing like life experience
right,
be able to offer people. And there's nobody that you listen to more than someone who's been through what you're going through. I mean, that's true in all phases of life. We
right.
all, that's just part of the human condition. So getting people like yourself into situations where you can actually talk to young people and also people who are currently incarcerated about what it's really like, basically.
Yeah, and that's kind of
Necessary. And
what I
getting
wanted to
people
do.
on the parole board who have a history of probation, because you can see through stuff that people who haven't been there can't see through.
Yeah,
I mean, it's pretty hard to fool somebody who a con can't really fool a con very easily.
yeah, no, and that's something
You
that
have a nose for,
yeah,
dare I
and
say, bullshit.
that's something that I noticed too. That when
That's really true.
a lot of guys were asking me when I was going to the parole board, "Are you ready? Are you nervous?" And I would tell them, "No, I'm not." I said because there's not a question they can ask that I'm not ready to answer
Right.
because I made the changes within myself to where I was confident enough to know that I can answer these questions with truth
And
and not
integrity.
and keep moving forward. So that's been my philosophy really the whole time I was in prison. I created some role playing games and we played in there. That was kind of my niche. I
Hmm.
created a couple military strategy games and we played them in there. So
And you wrote your book.
and I wrote
And you
my
were a good
book.
role model. And mainly you learned how to face the man in the mirror.
Yes,
And that is crucially important. And
yeah,
as
because
much as I would like to continue talking forever,
right,
we really need to wrap this up. So thank you very, very much for your time and congratulations on finding yourself and on being you.
thank you.
That's absolutely wonderful. It's wonderful. My personal belief for those of you who are listening is that everybody deserves a second chance as far as parole is concerned. There are some people, like we've just talked about and heard, there are some people who belong in prison. There are a lot of people who do not belong in prison. Everybody deserves a hearing and a second chance for the opportunity to be able to be released from prison.
Right,
That's one of the main principles that I believe in here in Iowa. that everybody who's in prison deserves to be heard. And then the parole board can decide whether or not that person deserves to get out. I disagree very much with life meaning life. And I think that's been clear in these videos if you've listened to any of the others. I really want to thank our guest very, very much for being here and for sharing his story. He has a lot to offer and he's very wise. He's also, the book that he has written will be released and it will be available on Amazon sometime in the next several months. And I will let you know when that happens, when that actually happens, when it's actually released. I put that on our webpage at the Iowa Justice Action Network. So once again, thank you for being here. And if you haven't subscribed, I wish that you would. You can reach me at iowaprisonperspectives@gmail.com. That's iaprisonperspectives@gmail.com. And if you have any comments, please share them with me. And once again, thank you for being here, as well as thank you, Rich, for being here.
Absolutely.
Yes. And everybody take care, and I will see you again in the next couple of weeks.
And thank you
For the
for
next
having me.
review. Yes. So thank you all and have good days. Take care of yourself. Don't let the turkeys get you down.